on being showing biblical hospitality, showing hospitality that goes beyond, above and beyond. Somebody said that, I can't remember exactly how it was quoted, but basically the gospel comes with a house key. That if you really want to introduce somebody to the Lord, you open up not just your heart and your mind, but you open up your homes to those that you want to draw into the family of God. So I was at a conference in the United States, a CAFO, Christian Alliance for Orphans Summit, that happens every year, which we were going to every year before COVID. And I just stumbled upon a session at this summit, this conference, that was about safe families. I hadn't never heard of such a thing, and it sounded interesting. And I sat there for, I think it was an hour and a half session or so, the whole time just having my mind blown every 30 seconds, going, wow, this is awesome. I can't believe I've never heard of this. This checks every box for me. This checks, like, how do churches want to be relevant? How do churches want to reach their community? How do churches want to be the hands and feet of Christ? How do we help? We've heard of many times of the foster care system being in crisis, and how this is a big problem, and how can we help? Many Christians are reluctant to get involved in a government system that they feel might be antagonistic toward their faith. And this, to me, it just answered so many questions. So I feel like I feel like God just put this in front of me, put this on my heart. It's been several years since then, and we have had info sessions, and we've had meetings, and we've tried to make things move forward in what we call the Oceanside area, which is north of Nanaimo, the Parksville, Qualicum, and surrounding areas. It has never really taken off. We've never got the momentum that we feel like we need to move things forward. So we're taking a different tact, which is there actually hasn't been a single launch of a Safe Families in British Columbia yet. There are several in Canada. I'll let Jason, when he comes up, give a little more detail there. But there's a bit of a change of approach happening in BC, trying different ways of getting the movement off the ground. So I'm going to introduce to you Mr. Jason Peters. Jason is the Western Canada Director for Safe Families Canada. Jason's been in this role for a few years. When I started, I've been in it longer. I don't know if I've been in it longer than Jason, but I initially learned about it and with Jason's predecessor, Sandy Harder. She's still involved. She's still on the national board, but she's handed off her role to Jason, and it's been cool working with Jason, so I will hand it off to him.
Thank you. Yeah, we're very thankful for your faithfulness here on the island, and even though it hasn't gone the way that you probably hoped it would or been as quick as you wanted, it's great to see that you're still at it. I'm very excited and encouraged for what's been happening, at least on the mainland in the last 3 days. So I've done 3 different info nights over the past 3 nights, one in Chilliwack, one in Langley, and one in Abbotsford. And there's just a lot of excitement from people about Safe Families. So I'll spend some time sharing a little bit about what we are and what we do as an organization. But let me just say that for me personally, it's not just something that is like a good idea. For me, it's something that I sort of lived as a child long before Safe Families existed. And so my parents both immigrated to Canada, my mom from Mexico and my dad from Belize. And when you saw me, that's exactly what you thought, I'm sure. This guy's mom is from Mexico and his dad is from Belize. Neither of them really spoke English. My dad had a grade 3 education and my mom a grade 6. They met in Ontario. And through my dad's sort of journey north, he was working in a sawmill at the age of 18, and a board backfired and hit him in the head. So since he was 18, he has struggled with pretty severe epilepsy, and it got worse and worse and worse, so that by the time that I was 3, he was no longer legally allowed to work. And when that happened, we went onto welfare. And we struggled financially. Not only that, we struggled because my dad was regularly in the hospital. There were multiple times as a child where the ambulance would come, pick him up, he's blue in the face, he's choking on his tongue again, and we're not sure if he's going to live. And so I would often be sleeping in other people's homes. Different people from the community would open up their home to me and my 3 other siblings so that there was a safe place to stay, and my mom would go with my dad to the hospital. We live in a very small town called Rosenord. It's about 1,200 people. At the time, it was closer to 700 people, so very small. 700 people, 700 churches. It's very Christian community. No, but honestly, there's 7 churches, and on a Sunday is the only time there's bad traffic, because everyone is going to church on that Sunday, and that was the biggest blessing to my family. They didn't have friends. They didn't have family, they didn't know people, but because they were Christians, they were able to plug into the church community. And so at the little co-op grocery store, you can charge your groceries. So you just go in there, you charge it to your account, and then you come back at the end of the month and pay it off. Well, my parents had to do that because they didn't have money for groceries, but often at the end of the month, they wouldn't be able to pay the grocery bill. And people from the community would go in anonymously, pay off their grocery bill. My whole childhood, we always had a minivan. We had multiple Ford Aerostars, and every time one broke down, someone else would donate a new one, and eventually we upgraded to the Dodge Caravan, so that was really classy time there. And so we had food. We had shelter. The home that we lived in, we made the local paper because we were 6 people living in a single bedroom home. It's about a 700 square foot home. I just went back for the first time since being a child the other day and saw all the rooms where I got in trouble in, which was very funny to relive that. Those are the first memories of I did something bad there as a kid, and then I got in trouble in that room. Tried to run away from home there, and I was told not to do that again in this bathroom. And so, but it was crazy because the house still looks the same. And I went in, and as a kid, it seemed bigger than it was. But as an adult, I was like, how did we do this? How were there, so I'm the oldest, I have a sister, and then twin brothers. And so how did that happen? My brothers slept with my parents in their bedroom, probably longer than my parents would have liked, and my sister and I shared a bunk bed in the living room. And eventually, when there was no more space upstairs, my sister and I had to go into the basement, which to this day is still unfinished. The only thing that was really different in the home is the basement is a lot drier now than it was when I was a kid, but it was a dank, wet basement. And so there was a lot of crisis in the home. My parents loved us. My parents did everything they could to provide for us, but they could not do it on their own. And I've met multiple social workers, 2 specifically, last year, who both told me, had I grown up in any other community, it's a 90% chance that myself and my siblings would have grown up in foster care. And it wouldn't have had to do with the lack of love in the home and desire from my parents. It would have had to do with the fact that they just would not have been able to feed us. They would not have been able to get us to the appointments that we needed to get to. I had pretty bad asthma, and if you heard my daughter coughing, she apparently inherited that from me, so sorry. And so I was held back from school, and I had to go to appointments. My dad was regularly going to appointments and would be in the hospital at times for over a month. And so my parents would need to get there. But eventually, the churches came together and actually bought the home that my parents currently live in now and set them up in that home as a rent to own so that one day they would be able to own that piece of land. So it's just an amazing story of the church community and their generosity. And what Safe Families longs to do is take the amazing things that are happening in church, and these sorts of stories happen all over the place, year after year, in all these amazing churches. But there's so many people outside of the church who have no community, who are completely isolated, who don't have healthy friends, healthy families. They don't have people that they can rely on consistently, and so they struggle. And when they go through crisis, when they have no one to turn to, it begins to spiral and lead to all sorts of negative situations. And so Safe Families is longing to connect people in our communities with that sort of support network. Safe Families began in 2003 in Chicago. There was a guy named Dave Anderson who started it, and he owned or worked at a foster care agency. And one of the things that he dealt with regularly was these families who did not meet the criteria for their services. And so even though things were really hard in the home, there were things that they just could not provide these families because things weren't bad enough. And so all he could do was wait until the situation got worse, and then he apprehended those children. And he thought there has to be a better way. Like, how do we keep it from getting here? And so he went to his local church and he just asked some people in the church, would you be willing to watch some kids while I work with the parents? And they said yes, and from that, Safe Families was born. And this is actually something that happened with a young guy that Hannah and I, my wife, have been working with for a long time, is that he needed therapy and he needed some other diagnosis, but the social workers were unable to provide those things. The only time that those resources could become available to a child or their parent was when the child was apprehended in state custody. And so in order to provide that for him, he needed to be apprehended. Or he's not apprehended and then he doesn't get those services. And this is happening regularly, and it's not because social workers don't want to help. It's that there's all sorts of things in place that sometimes limit that, and so there need to be these other resources available. Then in 2012, both the United Kingdom and Canada launched Safe Families. In the UK, it's actually a lot more government funded than it is here. In Canada, there's no government funding. All our funding comes from donors and grants and churches and corporate sponsors. But in the UK, it's primarily funded through the government. In Canada, we currently have 13 active chapters. Most of those are in Ontario, but we do have 2 in Manitoba and 1 in Alberta, in Edmonton. And then there are 8 in development across the country right now. And then in 2022, Safe Families launched in Hong Kong. And one thing that's very exciting for us, because most people have never heard of Safe Families, if you bring it up, I mean, 2012 might feel like forever ago, but it's not that long ago as far as history goes. And so we're a pretty new organization in the country. And between 2012 and about 2017, we only launched 3 chapters. 1 in Toronto, 1 in London, Ontario, and then 1 in Winnipeg. But since 2017, we have launched 10 other chapters and now have these other 8 in development, which we hope will launch within the next year or 2. And so because of that sort of rapid growth within the last few years, we just learned this year that Safe Families Canada is one of the fastest growing charities in the country, which is really exciting. Because if you talk to a chapter director, the people who run the local chapter, they would never know that. It doesn't feel like it's growing that fast, and certainly not fast enough in a lot of ways. But it's exciting to see the church starting to hear about it and then getting on board with it. And I think if you haven't heard about it before, there is an element to Safe Families that sells itself. The difficulty is that even though it sells itself as a vision, the ask of Safe Families can feel really hard, and so it makes it difficult at times to launch chapters. So who is Safe Families Canada? We are a movement of volunteers who are motivated by compassionate faith. And as Jesse said, we desire to create extended family-like supports for desperate families to keep children safe and to keep those families together. We seek to love children by caring for them, but also by caring for their parents and providing support to their parents so that the parents are able to love them in the way that they would want to love them. We seek to resource and connect parents. Safe Families, and this will be in another slide, but Safe Families doesn't see itself as the answer to any specific problem, but as part of the solution to families that are in crisis. And so there are moments when we can't maybe meet the need, but we work alongside other organizations and ministries to resource families and connect them with the right services when Safe Families is unable to do that. And then we also seek to connect parents who are very isolated and often feeling alone with people in local churches. And then lastly, we want to engage the church with the broken. This is something that churches want to do. Churches want to connect with the communities around them, but we aren't always sure how to do that. And when we have an idea of how to do it, we don't always know where those people are or how to connect with them. And when we know what we want to do and where to find them, we don't always know how to actually help and what's going to be a helpful thing. And there's a lot of things that cause maybe fear or apprehension in us, or feelings of not having the skills or being qualified to serve. And so Safe Families is looking to not only engage the church with the broken, but to also resource churches and equip churches and train people in churches to be able to love the community around them. And we do it by being radically hospitable and loving sacrificially. We have 4 sort of main objectives as an organization. One is to support and stabilize families. Many parents struggle because of their limited social supports. And again, like in my story, my parents just wouldn't have known people. It was the fact that they were connected to a local church that allowed them to have the support that they had. But had they not moved into such a Christian community, those supports would not have been there for them. And it would have been hard for them to build friendships with their English not being great. It would have been hard to find jobs with the lack of education that they had and skill and training in a lot of areas. And so they would have struggled and been isolated. Now, I mean, they probably wouldn't have, because my dad, I'm pretty sure where this board hit him is the part that removed any fear of engaging a stranger. So, like, he would have been fine. It's the most awkward thing to be around as a child, because he's trying to be best friends with everyone. But so, like, they would have been okay, but without that personality type in the home, it would have been hard. And the families that we work with sort of all have that in common. There is this feeling of loneliness and isolation. And this is something that has been around long before COVID. And our culture in North America has been moving toward being more isolated, more independent, more on social media, more alone. And the feelings of general loneliness are only increasing and not decreasing. And so even families that at one point maybe have felt supported are now struggling more than they were in the past. And so we seek to surround those families with love and caring support systems so that they don't feel so alone. Second, we want to do child welfare prevention. And so Safe Families is not an anti-foster care organization at all. We understand that there are times when children really do need to be apprehended, when being at home is very unsafe, and it would not be good for them to be there. But we also know that there are a lot of situations where children have been apprehended that had those families had support earlier, it may not have ended in that way. And so at least in Manitoba, I don't know here, but when we have talked with social workers there, a number of them will tell us that the majority of children that are removed from the home are removed due to neglect, not abuse. And neglect often happens because of this loneliness and this isolation and not having the supports in place to be able to care for their children. And so then the more isolated and overwhelmed and stressed they become, the more likely it is that things become more chaotic in the home. And so we want to interact with families before it's at that point. And again, our number one referral source in the country, in all of our chapters, is child and family service social workers. They are the ones who are working with families. They don't want to do apprehensions, but often they don't have resources to point people to that can care for kids in a safe way. And so we work alongside those social workers to do child welfare prevention. And then we long to see children prevented from abuse and neglect. And so usually when I present, I think this is true across the board. People aren't very quick to maybe admit it, but all of us, I think, have done things in our worst moment that we thought we would never do. We've said things, we've responded in ways that we thought we wouldn't, or at least when it was over, we probably knew we could do that, but hoped we never would. And that happens to everyone. And there are moments in homes when things get so overwhelming, when your life, your own personal life, is chaotic and you're going through stress and anxiety. It can be something like a job loss, a family member becoming sick or passing away. It can be being evicted from your home. It can be struggling with addiction or whatever it might be. And then to try and care for your kids while your kids are being kids. And then you lose control of your home and it becomes more chaotic. All of life becomes stressful. And day after day after day of that can lead anyone to making decisions that really hurt and affect the children and the individual. And I think a lot of us are only a few steps away from those sorts of things. So this last year, for my wife and I, has probably been the worst year of our life. There's lots of great things that have happened, but a year and a half ago, we moved back to Rosenort, which is where I'm from. So very small town. I'm from the country, my wife is from the city, and that is every country song, I guess, as well. And she never wanted to move to the country. But God made it very clear to us that that's where we were supposed to go. And so we moved. And on July 23rd, a year and a half ago, we took possession of our home, and my wife's mat leave ended. And in the middle of COVID, she started back at work, but it was distance and not in the office, so she had to figure out all of this work stuff that had changed. That's already pretty overwhelming. Plus, we had a 6-month-old at the time, or 9-month-old, and so there's all of this stuff going on. Then a month later, we started fostering a 15-year-old boy who came with a lot of his own baggage. So now you add a bunch of crazy stuff. It got wild in the home. But then, a month after that, her father was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer, and a month after that, he passed away. That was a terrible, terrible few months, which led to a very hard year and a half. But my wife and I have incredible family. We have incredible friends. We have an incredible support network. So whenever we needed, there was someone who could do respite for us with the 15-year-old. There was someone who could babysit our daughter. There were people who would bring us meals. There were people who would call and check in and see how we were doing. There would be people who would encourage us with their own journey through suffering and shared things that had been helpful for them as they healed and grieved. And so, but in any one of those moments, it really did. There were moments it got crazy, and we were just a few decisions away from probably doing things that we never thought we could because of how overwhelming it felt at times and how exhausting it felt. And that's happening all around us all the time in all sorts of homes. It's not just people who are low income. It's not just people who have grown up in really tough situations. It's everyone. It doesn't matter how rich or poor you are, how good of a childhood you had, or how bad. All of us go through incredibly stressful moments in our life that can very quickly spiral out of control. And so we seek to interact with families before the spiral has started or before it's really getting to the bottom. And then fourthly, we really love the church, and we think the church is positioned in what its mandates and its call is as people who are supposed to love other people to specific be able to care for and show compassion to the world around us. And so we want to build that piece of the church up. And we want to encourage that part of the church and connect the church with the community at large. And we'll see this, I think, a little bit later in the presentation, but the amazing thing that's happened and what I was most blown away by is when I started with Safe Families as the chapter director in Winnipeg, I thought the hardest group of people to get on board in that city with Safe Families, like a registered Christian charity who's caring for kids in their home, it's not sort of the thing that we're most best known for, right, in the history of this country. So I thought getting the child and family service workers on board to refer to us and having Indigenous agencies and people reach out to us for that would be the hardest bridge to build. Referrals have never been a problem. Volunteers have been a problem. Support financially for Safe Families has been the struggle. And so those churches and Christians who have been able to connect with these families in crisis who have been referred to us by social workers has been a beautiful thing, because there are all sorts of people in these cities who were apprehensive about working with a Christian charity who have experienced something really profound and beautiful. And that's been really cool to see. And there's a section in Scripture, and I can't remember exactly where it is, but it talks about how we should be known for doing good works, and that as we do good works, the world is going to look at us, and they're going to want to say bad things. They're going to want to criticize, but they're going to have nothing evil that they can say, because they're going to look at what we're doing and go, well, what am I going to say? Who else is doing that? Look at the way that they're loving. Look at their generosity. Look at their care for these people. Do I want to get in the way of that? Who else is going to do that? It is the church who has it at their core to care for the least of these. So how do we work? Each location forms a chapter. And so one thing that's very unique to BC is normally we go into a city and we launch a chapter there, but because of the struggle that we've had in sustaining these launch teams in the past in BC, there was a large group of people that decided we want to try and launch the Lower Mainland from Vancouver all the way to Chilliwack. And so that's what we did. So we took on a much larger chunk, and the goal then was to be able to hire a few staff that are going to represent each of those cities, but then to pool the resources of the church and the Christian community in all of those places to be able to launch and to build awareness in that way. And so it was really exciting to see all of these churches drive in between all of these different cities. Someone who was busy in Chilliwack for the Chilliwack meeting came to the Abbotsford meeting. Someone who was busy at the Abbotsford meeting came to the Langley meeting. And the excitement there was really cool to see. And so it's something that we would like to do here. We had been working to see a chapter launched in the Oceanside area. But we are thinking of expanding it to sort of this Nanaimo region. From here all the way up to, is it Qualicum, Jesse? I got my map right. I'm glad you showed it to me before this. To sort of try and unite the churches in that area and to launch a chapter on the island to begin to care for families within sort of this middle part. And then as it grows, maybe spin those off into their own separate chapters. But for now, we would want to hire a chapter director who oversees the chapter. They do sort of the admin and ongoing fundraising and training of volunteers and recruiting and connecting with churches and businesses and referral agencies. And then we would want to have a family placement coordinator. Preferably, we'd like to hire two, maybe both part-time, one that's in the Parksville sort of Oceanside area and one that would be in Nanaimo, who are specifically doing intake work, connecting with the families that are in crisis, and then partnering them with the volunteers to care for them. And so normally what we have is a chapter with a chapter director, a family placement coordinator that does intake, and then once those are established, we also look at hiring what we call a family coach supervisor, and you'll see what family coaches are later, but they sort of train our family coaches, and then they also help with the ongoing placements, and then a community engagement person whose sole focus is to connect with churches in the communities to provide them support as they support Safe Families. So how do we do what we do? Well, we call it our circle of support, and you'll see it in sort of full action in a couple slides, but there's sort of 4 main volunteer roles that we have within the circle of support. So on your screen, you're going to see what the circle of support specifically looks like. So we have host families, and our host families are our most screened volunteers. And this is the one that usually when a person hears host family, they either get really excited about Safe Families or they tune out and go, Safe Families is not for me. But let's just don't tune out. Once you hear host family, if you go, that's not for me, don't stop there. There's other roles. Most people, I think that Safe Families is Christian foster care, and that's not the case. Safe Families is short-term care of kids who are in crisis or whose parents are in crisis, and the goal is to empower those parents. We do no apprehension. The parent is always the guardian of the child and always has access to seeing their kids and having their kids returned home to them. And so our host families are volunteers that will care for kids overnight. This is very unique to Safe Families. There's a lot of amazing organizations and ministries out there that care for children and youth. But what's unique to Safe Families is that there are some volunteers who are trained and screened to be able to have kids stay in their home overnight. And these would be situations where maybe a parent is going into rehab and needs a safe place for their children. Or maybe a parent, similar to mine, has a lot of health conditions that require them to be in the hospital, and sometimes they need a safe place for their kids to stay while they're in recovery or going through surgery. It could be for a very overwhelmed parent. For those of you who have had kids in this room, how many of you never took a break? They never went somewhere else for even, a night or a few days, right? Most of us take that for granted because we have people that we can ask to do that. A lot of our families that we work with wouldn't have anyone that they could do that with. Every day, all the time, and their homes become more and more stressful. They get behind on stuff. They get discouraged. You go into a home, when we go into homes, often the first thing a parent will say to us is, "I'm so sorry, my house is a mess." They don't want their house, and for us, we don't care. We don't care. That's not what we're looking at all. We're looking at the way the parent loves the children, and they're doing a great job in desiring what's best for them. But they feel like I haven't been able to maintain any form of cleanliness sometimes. And they just go, if I could do that, I could just clean my house, that would be amazing. That would reduce some stress in my life. And so being able to have someone watch kids for a weekend while a parent is able to do that is very helpful. So sometimes it's a week-long respite. It can be up to 3 months, and sometimes it's just some weekends. Then we have our family friends. These are volunteers who would do like daytime respite, so more like maybe babysitting, but they would also be, if you aren't wanting to care for kids, right, like that's okay. It can include going out for coffee with a parent. I don't know if you have someone you go out for coffee with, but there's a lot of people who have no one that they can go for coffee with or get a meal with. That's a foreign experience to them, to just go out while someone's caring for their kids and they just go get to chat about their life. And this was something that my mom had. An amazing lady in town, Rose Reimer, had a hot tub. And my mom got to go hot tub. In the middle of, being on welfare and struggling, she got to experience this small luxury. And there was this person in her church who was willing to open up her home and her hot tub to sit and listen to my mom share. It might be mentorship. It might be helping a parent learn a new skill that maybe they haven't had before. It could be helping with rides to and from a doctor's appointment, or getting kids to and from school for a season if there's a reason why the kids have been missing school and it has to do with rides. And so family, friends really wrap around a family to care for them. And a lot of the times it's to love on the parents themselves. So although we're sort of a kid-focused organization in that we want to love and care for and see kids kept safe, we're also very much a parent organization where we want to see parents loved and encouraged and know that they're not alone and really supported. And the goal is to help them feel less chaos in their life, so that they're able to do what they want to do, and that is to shower their kids with blessing and love and just to be able to cherish them, but circumstances often make that difficult. Then we have our family coaches, and these are volunteers who facilitate the placements. So they are following up with a host family and a placing parent to make sure things are going well, to make sure that the placement was safe, to make sure that the parent feels supported, that they have goals that they're working toward, that everything was safe. They're connecting with the kids to make sure that where they were was safe, that they're comfortable with what's going on. They're connecting with the host family to make sure that their time was okay, asking them, did you notice anything? There have been times where our host families have noticed certain things within a child and have been able to bring that up with the family coach, and the family coach gets to go to the placing parent and ask them about their child and what sort of diagnosis has a child had, or is there any medication, and find out that there's nothing. And the parent, not like no criticism, life just, the chaos was normal. What was going on was normal. It's what they experienced every day. So they didn't notice certain things that a host family maybe noticed, and were able to just gently and lovingly ask and help that parent work toward getting a diagnosis for their kid. And all of a sudden, all of the chaos in the home, or most of it, is alleviated, because what was going on was just there wasn't the right medication, or there wasn't the right understanding of what this child is struggling with, or the parent didn't have the tool to understand maybe a sort of traumatic event that the child went through and how to parent that. And all of a sudden, the parent is able to engage their child in that way. And then lastly are our resource friends, and these are our volunteers who provide sort of material goods and services to a family. So maybe they're providing diapers or formula to a parent or parents who have a new child. There was one person in Langley actually who said they were like a young guy, I think. Well, he looked like he was a teenager, but it's hard to tell because he came up to me after, and I should have asked, but he could have been in his early 20s. And he didn't want to do anything with kids. That's not what he felt passionate about, but he loved bikes, and he loved fixing bikes. And he said, would anyone need their bikes fixed? And the answer is yes. And that's something that a resource friend might do, is there might be a family who doesn't have bikes. And if you're a parent who is overwhelmed and you want your kids to just get out of the house and go play, and their bike is broken, and so they're not going to go out and go for a bike ride because they can't, having someone who can fix the bike, amazing. And we sometimes think that the little thing is a little thing. Well, what leads to the most chaos in our life? A million little things. So every time we can unload a little thing from our mind, and that's one less thing we have to think about, it frees up space. And so resource friends help to take the little things away so that a parent is able to focus on other stuff. So yeah, maybe you don't want to do overnight hosting for a child, but there's a lot of other ways that you can support a family. And in fact, the hosting really, we would hope, would be the smallest thing that we do. Because even for us, even though it's all voluntary, there is still stress for a child to go into a stranger's home. There's still anxiety with that. Even if the parent is voluntarily doing it, even if the child says yes to going to that place, there's still stress about being in a new place. And so if there's other ways that we can support the family so that isn't needed, or at least until there's a healthy relationship built between the volunteers, and it's not sort of a crisis that they be in someone's home, the better it is for when maybe they provide a weekend. And now they're going for a weekend at like an aunt and uncle's house. They're not going for a weekend at a parent's house. And so don't feel like if you don't want to do overnight hosting, there's nothing there for you. So this is sort of the circle of support and the way that it works. So we had a single dad. The very first person I worked with, he found himself sort of single overnight and in charge of 4 children between the ages of 15 months old and 11. And it was a big change, and then he learned slowly that there had been a bunch of traumatic things going on in the home that he didn't know because they would happen while he was working on night shift. And so he found out those things, and he reached out to Child and Family Services and was one of those people who were told that you do not meet the requirements for our services. There is no addiction, there's no abuse. He at the time had a job. He was a loving, kind person. But the social worker had heard of Safe Families and so referred him to us. So he was a family in crisis. And so he reached out to us, and we went into his home. And we explained what we did, and he didn't want any of our help because we were a Christian organization, which was fair because he had had only bad experiences with all of the Christians that he lived with when he was in foster care. And so he was very apprehensive. And so we talked with him, and he realized, like, we're the only group of people, though, that's there and can help, and that's who he was referred to by the people he reached out to. So we said, is there anything that we can do for you? And he said, well, if I could have somebody watch my kids 2 times a month for like 2 to 3 hours so that I can go shop at Costco, that would be really helpful. Because we all know, is there a Costco here? Yeah. So we all know that a Costco trip with kids is probably not 2 to 3 hours. And even without kids, for me, then I just go down every aisle and I think of all the new things that I probably need. And so it's not a 2 to 3 hour trip either. And so that is very overwhelming. And you're pulling 4 kids with you, and then you get home and you want to put all those groceries away. Well, that's not happening when you get home. You got to open up all the new things so the kids can try all the treats, and then they want to eat, and then it's out on the counter and you're moving on to the next thing, and it just feels like chaos. So we found our family friend, and they said they would be willing to watch the children 2 weekends a month for a few hours, and so he would go. And so then he went shopping. After a few months, he would allow that stay to be longer because he felt comfortable with those volunteers. And so he got a little bit of extra time to himself after he went shopping, just for himself. That was great. We didn't really hear from him for a while. And then he reached out and asked if we would be sort of a reference for him and help him to navigate furthering his education so he could become an EA because he had lost his job. And during this time, and he wanted to have a schedule similar to his kids. So we worked with him to do that, but then the stress level increased because he's parenting, now he's doing some classes, and he's trying to think about getting resumes put together and where is he going to get a job. And so we said, is there someone who could watch my kids for a weekend? And this was really exciting for us because we had built trust with this guy and with his kids. And so we found a host family, they watched his kids, and he was able to get caught up on this other stuff in his life. Stress levels went down. I didn't hear from him for a year. His file was closed. Then he called me, and he said, hey, would you be a reference for me? I'm like, okay, this is a common theme. What do you want me to be a reference for? I haven't seen you in a while. And he goes, well, I'm thinking of going to Bible school. I might want to be a pastor. I was like, okay. That's very cool. And then he goes, oh, yeah, just so you know, last week I got baptized. And I was like, all right, man, like, so we're just going to pause right here. Let's rewind. What's going on? You didn't want anything to do with Safe Families. And so just to be clear, this is not the common story. Not everyone's wanting to be a pastor, all right, after being involved with Safe Families. But I was like, what happened? Because you didn't like us, your experiences had been bad, you didn't really want us to do anything, and you really did not like Christians. Like, that was your sort of attitude. You were kind and polite, but you had a lot of hurt. And he just said from the moment that he interacted with Safe Families staff, to the family friend volunteer, to the host family, that what he received was consistency. They were all the same. They all loved me. None of them judged me for why I needed my kids in their home. And no one forced anything on me. No one forced me to believe what they believed or tried to force my kids or manipulate them and then get them to come to me and try and tell me about why I should be a Christian. They just loved me, and they went above and beyond. They offered more hours. They offered rides to bring my kids home so I didn't have to go pick them up. They tried to support as best as they could. And he said, if that's what real Christianity was, then that actually is something that I wanted. And realized was not what I had experienced prior to that. And so for him, that was his story. But there we had a family in crisis, supported by family friends and a host family. And then a year after that, we had some really bad flooding in Manitoba. And that happens pretty regularly there. But it's pretty rare that it happens in sort of the city, but a bunch of houses flooded because of how much snow we had. And so his basement leaked, and so there were people from the church, resource friends, who came and helped him jackhammer in his basement and dig around his house to help him with the water problem because he wasn't able to get insurance for it. And so people came in and did that work for him for free. So he had this whole circle of support, and when he started, he had no one. And by the end of 2 years, he had a group of people that he could call on. And Stuart would continue for a while to call me every few months because there'd still be this anxiety. And all I'd have to do is just say, here are all of the people that you can call. And he would just he would calm down on the phone when he realized that he wasn't alone anymore. And it just he wasn't used to that. And so that is the way that we work. And I don't know if you have small groups or like life groups or Bible study groups or cell groups or whatever your church experience has been, but it's always the most fun to do this together. And to get your group, a men's group, a young adults group, whatever it is, together to say, we want to do this. Because it might be that there's someone who wants to do a hosting, and there's someone who wants to do some mentorship, and there's someone who wants to help maybe patch some holes or fix a fence or do some of those things. And when we do it together, all of a sudden a person goes from 0 to 5, 6, 15 people, but we don't feel the pressure to have to do everything. Now we have people in our court. If maybe I'm hosting, I have 5 other people who are cooking me meals while I'm doing the hostings, who are paying for the extra gas for me giving rides, so it's not this burden for me and I don't feel like I'm alone. And so that is the way that we sort of model this circle of support and wrapping around families who are in crisis. So what do we need to launch a chapter on the island? Well, we already have a chairperson, but we need the launch team. We need a group of people who are going to use their skill and their passions to work together to build awareness of Safe Families, to raise funds for Safe Families in this area, to be able to launch and hire a chapter director and that family placement coordinator to start serving families in this community. And so the 3 official roles that we need are a chairperson, which we have, a treasurer, and a secretary. But then on top of that, we need more people. People who are interested in social media, or maybe people who are good at marketing or communicating, people who like planning events and could plan fundraising events, people who have experience in social work who could lend insight. One thing that's been very valuable for the team in the Lower Mainland is they have someone who was a social worker, who would go in and do the investigations and have to do the apprehensions at times, and who has now moved into working for the Fraser Health area doing social work within the hospital. And so she has experience and can give firsthand reasons for why this is needed when the team is going out and asking people, would you consider supporting Safe Families financially, or would you consider maybe being a volunteer in the future? And someone says, well, is it really needed? She can say yes. They also have an RCMP officer on the team who does the same thing. He's at the meetings and can remind this team of the need and why this is important. And in Lethbridge, that steering committee, there was one of the members that talked with an RCMP officer there who was not a Christian and was so desperate to see Safe Families start in Lethbridge. He didn't care that we were a Christian organization. All he cared about was that when he went into the homes that he went into, that he would be able to have someone that could be called. Because there are a lot of situations where, again, people don't meet the criteria for service, or because the system is so overwhelmed. Not because social workers are bad, but there's so much need that families fall through the cracks and there aren't a lot of places to refer them to. And they were averaging about 5 domestic abuse calls a day in 2022. In North Battleford, when I presented there, a social worker came up to me and said that in 2022 alone, they had lost 100 foster homes. That was 100 people who weren't caring for kids. There was a huge need for people to be a resource to care for families. And so maybe you are or know people who would fit this role that you could go and share, hey, would you want to be on the steering committee? But using your gifts and passion to love other people to promote Safe Families. And the goal would be to raise $50,000 so that we could launch, and that would allow us to hire 2 part-time people and give us confidence that this can be sustainable in the area, and then it would grow from there. The steering committee then, as it gets close to that $50,000, begins to look for who would be the chapter director, and then once the chapter director is hired, the steering committee dissolves, and the chapter director hires the family placement coordinator and puts together what we call a leadership council, which is like an advisory group. So Safe Families Canada is a national organization with a national board of directors, but each chapter has its own group of volunteers who support the chapter director in continuing to raise funds and giving advice and counsel to that chapter director. For this chapter here specifically in this area, you could start today by donating. You can take a picture of that slide if you want, or Jesse can share the slide with you, but there's multiple ways to donate. And all of the money donated to the Oceanside chapter goes toward the launch of that chapter. It doesn't go to any of the other chapters. It doesn't go to me. I'd be happy to take it. I can give you my own personal, bank account. You can donate to me if you want. But all of this goes to Oceanside, and it sits there in anticipation of the chapter launching. And I used to really honestly hate talking about money, asking for money, but I realized I don't think I ever really believed in something enough that I didn't care about shamelessly saying that Oceanside needs people to donate. It needs the church to say, yes, we want to do this for families. We want to wrap around families in this way, and we're willing to invest in it. And not to overstate the point, but financially it's not getting easier for people. Stress levels aren't going down in people's lives. The need for Safe Families is only growing in our country, in our cities, in our communities. And so it is something that I think is very needed, especially when we're talking to the professionals who are doing the referrals. You could become a Safe Families church. There's different ways to get involved as a church. By being a participating church, that's a church that encourages its members to think about Safe Families. Maybe it's in your bulletin occasionally. Maybe it's on a slide every once in a while. Maybe you're doing a once-a-year sort of offering that goes to it. You could become a lead church, which actively is recruiting and supporting volunteers from that church, and a community lead church is working with the chapter director to increase the support system. One question that we got yesterday, or it wasn't a question, it was more of a statement, and a person was surprised that we didn't get more pushback from secular organizations, the government, and other agencies. And that might come. But right now we haven't, because the need is so high. And when social workers, it all spreads by word of mouth. And social workers who interact with Safe Family staff, people who have referred to Safe Families, the families who have been served by us, who are primarily not Christian families, have all felt supported, have all felt loved, have all felt just cared for and amazed that there are people doing this. And so really there hasn't been a lot of pushback because people have just been loving selflessly, and there's not a lot to push back on when it comes to that. Most of the families, don't become pastors, but most of them have a very, very good view of the church and Christians. And that to me is a really exciting thing. Because often what we hear is all of the negative stuff surrounding churches. But when you're talking with the people who have got to work with Safe Families, they have a very good view of the church and their communities. And so that has been encouraging. Doesn't mean it's going to stay that way all the time, but so far there hasn't been pushback. Yeah.
I'm Jesse's wife, Brandolyn. A few years ago, when we pitched this to the churches up in Parksville, we invited the social workers up in Parksville and whoever their lead was, and they came and they were very excited about it. And their main question when we left the info session was, no, but how soon can you make this happen? We want to get a feel. We were quite nervous going in, and that was their main thing, is no, we want to know, how soon can you make this happen?
Yeah, thank you. Because the goal is not to get kids into our homes. The goal is to empower parents and love parents to be the parents. They are the best parent for their child, right? So unless the trauma of apprehension is going to be less than what is going on in the home, the best place for the child to be is with their family. And so Safe Families internationally has done over 70,000 overnight hostings since 2003. And 95% of children who enter into a Safe Families home do go back to their parents or a close family member. And that's pretty amazing stat because it means that our volunteers really are doing a great job of loving kids, and we're able to help parents get through the crisis that they're in. That's not to say life gets easy. None of our lives are easy. It just means that parents are now supported. But if you have any questions about Safe Families, I'd be happy to try and answer them. Yeah?
I have a comment that I'd like to add to what you just said, Brandon. The provincial government in BC here, within the past, I think, 2 months, have just, I'm going to call it downloaded or made a change with First Nations families where First Nations families want to care for their own children and not have them go into the foster system government-wise provincially, right? So I see that there's a real opportunity because I had this thought, oh my, can they do it? Are they going to be okay meeting that much of a need? And I say that from a personal experience, being really close to some of our Cowichan Tribes families and their youth. And
Yeah, no, thank you.
I got a question. 30 years ago, I lived in Parksville, and I had a 7-bedroom home. At the time, we decided we were going to try this fostering thing, and we went in there to get interviewed. And at that time, they had 100 kids at risk. And because of my past, I come out of the world, you know, and that, and I'm a little bit of a record. And I was quite. They interviewed me. And I said, well, I used to be into drugs, alcohol, gambling, and all the other stuff. So it was so desperate. You know, I was a Christian at the time, going to Qualicum church. She said, forget the check. You know, I said, hey, I want to get checked. Yeah, you know, because the RCMP, you know, got to check out our records and that. He said, no, can you take somebody tomorrow? We had a 15-year-old in our house the next day, and suicidal, and we worked with her. Then we ended up with 3 other kids, 5-year-old and a 6-month-old, no, a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old we had for 5 years. And the needs are huge. If you can do something, I mean, I wish I was young enough to, you know, start again. I'm a pretty busy guy, but I wholeheartedly support you and hope that you can get a chapter going really quick. But do you guys get challenged on that? You know, you got people to support. Is there a police check?
Yeah, so we do police checks with a vulnerable sector search in different provinces. We also will do the specific like child welfare checks that they do to make sure that there's nothing that comes up on their end. Then we have a pretty intensive application, especially for host families with a home study. And that home study has been approved by the ministry in Ontario. CAS approved that. On top of that, we also look for 3 references, a personal, a pastoral, and a professional for each adult volunteering in the home. Then there's an abuse policy that we have, an abuse training that volunteers go through every year. And then we also have specific volunteer role. Those volunteer roles all have their own video training. And then we're continuing to increase our training to do trauma-informed training. So we have one staff who's working on that because that's sort of her specialty. And then we are looking at partnering with an organization in Winnipeg that does specific training for churches in how to interact healthily with the Indigenous community in a way that, that really acknowledges the stuff that's been done and also helps us understand cultural differences and how do we do that. And so one of the things that parents who are placed in a Safe Families home can request is that their children not participate in religious activity. And this is one of the reasons why we've been able to have, I think, really good relationships with other communities. And so in those situations, in Winnipeg, that box has never been checked, actually. Every parent has always said, I'm pretty open to my kid experiencing stuff as long as it's not being forced on them. But they can check that because, again, the goal is to empower the parent and equip the parent and for them to experience Christianity, not just hear about it or be brought to something. But in those cases, let's say you were going to host for 3 months, we wouldn't ask you to not go to church for 3 months. We would do the circle of support where we would find volunteers who are taking on those different Sundays so that people are able to still go to those sorts of things. Any other questions? Well, thank you. It's not me. I didn't come up with it. It's all on video, yeah. Yeah.
So good, thank you.
Yeah.
There's people watching online. That's why I had the mic there. We can hear each other, but people online can't hear us.
Yeah. Well, I'll hand it back to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Awesome. I'm always a little bit nervous when someone else, I don't think I do a particularly excellent job of presenting Safe Families, but there's so many things about it that whenever anybody talks about it, I'm like, oh, I hope they talk about it. I hope they remember this and hope they include that. I think that you did an awesome job, Jason, of including so many. There are things that that we haven't even touched upon. There are so many cool stories of people that, like, what a way to be introduced to church, to Christians, and to Jesus Christ, to people that come alongside. One question that didn't get asked, that just came to mind, people say, what are people being compensated for? And maybe the answer is self-evident. These are volunteers. When in the foster care system, the foster care system does effectively reimbursement. They're trying to help cover the costs. But the children, quite quickly, if they're of any age, realize you're getting money for me being here. And I've talked to social workers that say that there are, not necessarily all by any means, but there are foster homes that put the kids in their homes because they know it's going to bring dollars in the door. And when a child realizes, wait, you're doing this and you're getting what? You're getting nothing? You're the shift that will put into the child's mind and to the parent's mind and to the relative that hears about this and the family and the friend, the opportunity is immense. On the fundraising front, I don't know if this is encouraging, but when we started this, the dollar figure was much lower. It was more like $30,000 we need to raise. And inflation, and also there's a bit of learning that's gone on. They realized, the national board realized that really wasn't enough to effectively to make this happen. Initially, the idea was, we're just going to hire a director. That's going to be the sole employee, one full-time person. They've experimented. They've tried 2 part-time people. It's taken different roles, but they realized that when they did launch with $30,000 in the bank, that they were kind of struggling to just keep the budget going and to meet the needs. So that dollar figure's gone up. But $50,000 may sound like a lot of money to raise, but I think we've already got 10 in the bank from the fundraising that's been done over the last few years. So that all of a sudden, that number 50 just turned into 40. The account right now is under Oceanside. Oceanside is not Nanaimo. Oceanside is north of Nanaimo, but we're looking at one chapter that covers both. And so the funds that have been raised for Oceanside would become applicable to Oceanside and Nanaimo. I'm not sure exactly. We'll be discussing what form that's going to take as far as how the chapter is listed and the email address, because I've got Oceanside on a lot of the contact information and whatnot, but we'll keep you posted on that. I'd like to collect email addresses for anybody that wants to get added to our email list. There is some literature on that wooden table at the back there, if you want to take some with you. I honestly believe we clearly need the people for a launch committee, for a steering committee to get going. That is clearly a big need. And maybe you feel like that's something you're excited about, and maybe you don't. But I feel like as important, and in my opinion, even more important than that, is we need people that are excited about it, that are willing to learn about it and talk about it. And there is a lot of good resources. I enjoy talking about it. If you know me, I've got some cards, I've got my phone, you can call me, I'll give you my phone number. If you want to just talk about it, if you want to go for coffee and just kind of wrap your head around as you leave here, there will be questions that come to mind, like, what about, how does this work, and how does that work, and what about these situations, and what do you do here? Jason doesn't have all the answers, I don't have all the answers, but just continue the conversation and share the concept. There's an Oceanside Facebook page. At one point in time, we started a Victoria one. I'm not sure that we haven't done a lot with them of late, but if you want to join on those, then when there is meetings, when there's things happening, if we get events going, you will be hearing about them. So yeah, stay in contact. And just there's countless, but dozens of really good videos online from, it's been 2003, and 20 years of history. Testimonials from the States. There's news reporting that's happened about safe families. Tons of videos online that you can just go and look on the Canadian website, look on the US website, and just inform yourself about it. But I truly believe that it is a tool that God is using and wants to use across this country to introduce people to what it means to love God, and what it means when God calls us to love each other. There's countless stories about churches getting smaller and less relevant, and I truly believe this isn't the answer, but it is. I think it's part of it. So I really appreciate you coming out today. If you think of anything else, I'll be around here for a bit to speak to if you want to. And Jason's got a ferry to catch here pretty soon. He's ferrying back to the mainland and then flying out early tomorrow morning. So thank you again for making the time to come over to the island. He said, I'm not sure if we'll have enough time to do an info session, but maybe we'll go for coffee. I said, I think we can do something.
I have a personal question for you. Yeah. Mr. Reimer?
Peters.
What's your last name?
Peters.
Oh, Well, why did you mention Reimer earlier?
Oh, Rose Reimer was my mom's best friend.
Oh,
She's the Reimer.
okay. Our daughter-in-law that lives in Tofino is Rhea Reimer from Winnipeg, and the Reimers all came out for their wedding a couple of years ago, and they're the Reimer family from Winnipeg, Mennonites, of course. And so when you mentioned that, I said, is he a Reimer? Because they might be related. Thank you, bless you. She's, by the way, she's a grade 2 Sunday school, I'm a teacher, pardon me, school teacher in Tofino with a big heart and a new baby.
That's great. The thing I heard was Tofino, and that was what I wanted to do.
Her husband's a fishing guide, his son.
Before I dismiss you, let's just ask God to do what He's going to do with this meeting and with the people that have heard it, and with where He's going to go with it. Lord, we delight in you, Lord, that you are the God of reconciliation. You're the God of putting the lonely in families, Lord, and you have called your church to radical love, to radical hospitality, to radical ways of demonstrating and living out your truth in your gospel. And Lord, I thank you for putting this on my heart. It's been a burden. It's been a question. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong or missing something, Lord, but we trust that your timing is perfect, that you will bring things to fruition. Lord, I pray for the Lower Mainland, for the info sessions that have happened this week. Seems like some of them have been very well attended, and there's some very, very strong enthusiasm, Lord, and I praise you for that. And just ask you to have your way. And Lord, we just pray against the schemes of the enemy to keep your people from working well together. And Lord, we just plead the blood of Christ over this movement and over the individuals who have already stepped forward and those who will. And Father, we just pray that your purposes would be accomplished and that lives would be transformed as they are introduced to you. And Lord, we pray for this meeting here and on the island, Lord, that you would bring those people to mind, Lord, to our minds that we should be speaking to about. Lord, that you would lay on the hearts of those that you have prepared for this time, Lord, that you'd lay upon the hearts those that you would have to step forward and to take a role. And Father, we just pray that the vision would be communicated clearly, Lord, and Lord, that you would help bring in the funds. And Father, we just praise you for what you're going to do, for we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. You're dismissed.